Chamberlain, and we're here at the Lane Place in Crawfordsville, Indiana, on January the 9th, 1996. You may read or hear in future years of a big blizzard that the United States had, and we had some of it right here in Crawfordsville. They had more of the blizzard of 96 in the eastern states like New York, Pennsylvania, and Washington, D.C., and so forth. But we're quite comfortable here at the Lane Place in Crawfordsville, and today we're going to continue interviewing World War II veterans that had a varying degree of experiences, both in training and also on the battlefields in Europe and in Japan. To start out with, I might say how all of this got started. Bob Wernley should be given credit, a retired attorney here in Crawfordsville. He's the one that called me, and we talked about this, that we should be doing this. We started some 4, maybe 5 years ago, and have done several interviews about various incidents that we've had during the war. Today we have a very interesting interview to do, which we'll get to in just a few minutes. Our camera operator is Mike Hall, Executive Director here at the Lane Place. These films, as you'll notice when you get them, are available in the library for use in classrooms and for family use at home to see, and other places that you might want to show a film like this. These films are property of the Montgomery County Historical Society, and like I said, they are available in the library. May I ask what your name is?
Paul Dickson.
I see. Where were you born, Paul?
I was born in Montgomery County.
When?
In Walnut Township.
Oh yes, I know where that is.
Out near Mace.
Yes, I've had some good friends out there. A man by the name of Russell Butler lived out there and knew him very well.
Born and raised about a mile and a half from me.
Yeah, a very nice gentleman. When were you born, Paul?
June 25th, 1925.
June 25th, 1925, I see. Did you have any brothers or sisters?
I had 3 sisters and no brothers.
I see. What were their names?
The oldest sister is Doris, and the next one was Leah, and then Wilma was the younger sister. I was in between Wilma and Leah.
Are they living?
Yes, they're all living.
Yeah, that's good. Who were your parents?
Waldo Dickson and Anna Dickson.
What was her maiden name?
Joseph. Anna Joseph.
Anna Joseph. Were they Montgomery County people?
My father was born and raised in Montgomery County, and my mother was born over in Hendricks County.
Oh yes.
Her father was a Baptist minister.
Well, that's interesting.
Yes.
Where did you go start out school at?
I went to school at Mace, and then New Ross.
In New Ross. In New Ross, did you know George Terry?
Oh yes, sure did. George and I were classmates.
Is that right?
Yeah, all through school.
Graduated in 1920.
In 43.
In 43. From Mace. Well, after you got out of high school, then what did you do, Paul?
Well, before I got out of high school, my parents moved from New Ross to New Richmond, and I went to work right quick at Lafayette Kalamazoo Furnace Company, back when it was Kalamazoo Direct to You, and so then I didn't graduate from high school with the rest of them at that time. I finished my schooling later on in the service. I'll explain that to you later.
I see. How long did you work for Kalamazoo Furnace Company?
Well, until the day before I was drafted. I was working for Kalamazoo at that time. I was in Fort Wayne working for them up there, and I worked up until about 5 o'clock in the evening, and then had to get back to Montgomery County so I could leave the next morning for the service.
Yeah. What date were you drafted?
September the 17th, 1943.
September the, I see. Where did you go?
I went to Fort Knox, Kentucky for my basic training in the Armored Training Replacement Command.
I see. How long were you there?
I was there until around 1st of March of 44.
You were there quite a while. What did you do
through basic training, we were trained for about everything with armor. Of course, we all had to go through gunner school and tank driving, and we also had half-track infantry training, judo, commando, demolition. We were trained to do about anything that had to be done. If we lost a tank, we still weren't going to be useless. Mm-hmm. We would be able to still function as a serviceman.
Yeah. Paul, and I ask you, how did you get interested in tanks? Was it just that you were assigned to tanks, or?
I was drafted and sent down there for training, and that's where they put me.
That's where they
tanks.
put you.
I think because probably I was an old farm boy, and my mechanical aptitude tests were pretty high. Mm-hmm. So I ended up as a tanker.
Mm-hmm. Tell us a little more about your training in tanks in Kentucky.
Well, I was down there, I guess, about the coldest year that Kentucky had had in a long time.
Till this year.
And yeah, and of course, tanks that, when we moved a tank, you'd only moved it 3 or 4 feet sometimes, and you had to stop and you had to go back and set it back where it was and grease it and clean the gun and everything as if you'd been running for a month. It was a continuous thing. I guess they were trying to teach us that we had to take care of that equipment because that equipment would have to take care of us. We were trained for practically everything that you could think of, from bazookas, hand grenades, setting booby traps. Mm-hmm. I was trained for enough stuff that
you could have done anything.
Pretty well, yes.
What kind of a tank did you train with? What was it called?
I was in the medium tank, which was M4A3, I believe was what they called that. It was the old Sherman tank. Mm-hmm. About a 34-ton tank, and had a 75 millimeter cannon on it. And some of them, and a little later on, they put 76 millimeter cannons on them, so that the 3-inch shell from the Navy would be interchangeable with the
I see.
The Army.
What powered the tank?
Well, most of the tanks that we had a 9-cylinder Pratt & Whitney aircraft engine in it. Is it radial engine, 9-cylinder radial, air-cooled. And there were a few of the tanks that had 500-horse Ford V8 engines in them, but most of them that we had in combat were Pratt & Whitney.
They burn gasoline?
Yes, aircraft gas.
Aircraft
yeah.
gas.
Pratt & Whitney was a 380-horse engine. Pretty good engine. It was usually got us in trouble every once in a while.
on a tank, I don't know much about tanks, Paul. What would be a crew, and what did each crewman do?
There were 5 people in a tank. Had a driver, assistant driver, a gunner, assistant gunner, and a tank commander. The assistant gunner was the radio operator, and each of us had throat mics, and we could talk to each other in the tank on a radio system. And if we wanted out, we had to push a button, and we'd be talking to the rest of the company. The tank commander, I always thought he had the worst job. He had his head out of the tank most of the time. He was the guy that was trying to look out for, see where we was going, and give everybody directions. He was right above me. I was gunner, and he'd usually have his knees in my back where if he wanted me to swing to the right, he'd kind of nudge me to the right, and if it was to the left, he'd nudge me to the left and get me on target. I was a tank. The sights on a tank is through the periscope.
I see.
And it's a pretty powerful telescope in there. You could see up to, well, I think the sights went, if I remember right, the sights went up to about 4,200 yards, something like that. And that's quite a distance.
Yes. Well, now, could everyone in the tank see out?
Everyone had a periscope to look out at. That was it. Mm-hmm. Well, let's see, no, the assistant gunner didn't have a periscope. He was sitting over there back in the corner. He kind of had it by himself.
Well, who steered the tank?
The driver.
And where was he?
He was down the lower left. In the lower left front.
What, did he have a steering wheel or?
No, had levers.
Had levers.
Levers like a bulldozer.
I see.
Steering levers.
Yeah, did it have instrument panel to
Yes.
know your RPMs?
Yes.
And
Had an instrument panel and had gear shift and everything. It was more like the old trucks were at that time to drive.
various speeds forward?
Yeah.
Could you go backwards with one?
Very slowly. I always said if I ever had the opportunity to design one, I'd put a faster reverse on it because about 2 or 3 mile an hour was top speed backwards. And if you needed to retreat, that was awful slow.
Was it noisy in the tank?
Yeah, there was a good deal of noise. It was the tanks were padded with foam rubber to help take out some of that, but it was kind of, you could hear noises all right. It was hard to talk to each other.
Mm-hmm. Did you have guns other than the big 75 millimeter?
Alongside of the 75 was, and on the same, with the same sights, was a 30 caliber machine gun. And then the assistant driver had a 30 caliber machine gun that he could use. And up on the turret, we had a place for a 50 caliber. But it was very seldom that any of us ever used that 50 caliber up there because it was too much in the way of getting out of that tank when you got hit. It was always in the road over the turret.
Mm-hmm.
You only had the 3 guys in the turret of the tank only had one place to come out at.
Mm-hmm.
And it was always customary that the tank commander come out first and then the gunner and then the assistant gunner. But,
Mm-hmm. All right. What? Now you were in Kentucky, Fort
Knox.
Fort Knox, Kentucky, and is this the only place you trained in the U.S. of A.?
We went from Fort Knox, came home for about a 12-day delay en route furlough, as they called it at that time, and went to Fort Meade, Maryland. And I was fortunate enough at Fort Meade to be put into a company that we put on a demonstration with tanks, where they bring out a regiment at a time and set them along the hillside where it was kind of like a natural theater there, and they would lay an artillery barrage down this valley, and we'd come through and shoot everything up to the left.
Mm-hmm. What date did you go to Fort Meade?
October the 8th, 1943. Oh, Fort Meade, excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
No, it was on March the 12th, 1944. Went to Fort Meade, Maryland.
How long were you there?
Oh, about 5 or 6 weeks. And then they started heading us for England.
What did you do different at Fort Meade than at Fort Knox?
Well, there were 25 of us that were assigned to 5 tanks, and like I say, we went out on these demonstrations,
Mm-hmm.
laying a barrage, and they had a little town down there the guys would build up, and we'd shoot it down for them.
Mm-hmm. Did you make a lot of good friends?
Oh yeah, that was yeah, we had
Fort Meade.
that was quite an enjoyable place to be in. That was near Baltimore, Maryland.
Mm-hmm. Would this have been several of your friends that you were at Fort Knox with?
Yes, a lot of us were together at Fort Meade, and I had one buddy that I went to school with, Eugene Woodard. He was in the Coast Guard at Baltimore, and I spent a weekend with him one time at the Coast Guard. And
That's great.
if you can imagine how a brown uniform looked with all those Coast Guard guys.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, then, Paul, we were at Fort Meade 5 weeks. Then what'd you do?
Went to Port Orange, New Jersey, and we were there just a short time. They was getting us prepared to go overseas, and then we were shipped to England.
I see. What did you go over to England on?
A big ship, the Canadian luxury liner. They called it the Dominion Monarch. It was quite a large ship. I'm getting a call.
Yeah, let's take a slight break here. Yes, we're back here now with Paul Dickson, talking about his experiences in World War II. And Paul, before we took our break, you were on a Canadian ship bound for England.
Yeah, we were quite a few days going over. We were in a convoy, and I served KP all the way from the time we pulled out of the harbor in New York until we landed in Liverpool. Our company was the first one on the ship, and so they put us on KP duty. That was quite an experience with being on an English ship. And, we had to learn how to eat beef or mutton stew. That was quite an experience. And then when I got to England, got to Liverpool, I had a sore throat, and I ended up in the hospital with scarlet fever.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. What, on that ship, how many were on there?
Oh, I had no idea. It was a large ship. It was, I think, something like 5,000 or 6,000, 5,000 or so.
Did you, when you were in a convoy, did you zigzag as you went across?
Yes.
Did you? Did you ever have drills where they might or alert you what to do if they sighted an enemy sub?
Oh yes, we were alerted and told which way to go and what to do. And
did they sight any subs on the way over?
not that I ever knew of. We had a lot of destroyers there, and there was so many of them. There was over 100 ships in the convoy. Made you feel rather secure, you know.
Yeah. And you landed at Liverpool. How many days did it take you to go across?
We were 14 days from the time we left the States until we landed in Liverpool.
14 days of KP.
Yep, and we sat in Liverpool, or sat in New York, waiting to get on that ship for 2 weeks before we took off. So.
Well, you had plenty to eat then,
yeah,
didn't you?
Yeah,
that was one advantage to it. Okay, what'd you do when you got to Liverpool, Paul?
Well, we were sent in by War Minister England to an army camp, and like I say, in just a few days, I went to the hospital with scarlet fever, and we didn't do any training. There was no training going on while we were in England, and I spent 17 or 18 days in the hospital with it around the scarlet fever, and I got out of that on D-Day. June 6th, it was the day I got out of the hospital. I always thought they kicked me out because they had to make room for casualties that would be coming back.
Did you know that D-Day was about to take place? Could you tell by the
No, we
operations?
we had no idea. It was not where I was at. No.
Well, what did you do on D-Day then? And you got out of the hospital, what did you do?
I was sent back to my company, back to with the same guys that I'd been with.
That's good.
And then in just a few days, they took 21 of us that were qualified as tank drivers, and we took 21 tanks across the channel.
How'd you take them across? On the barge?
Went across on these LTCs, got the back end that lays down. And that was an experience all of its own.
Tell us about it.
These tanks, they had them waterproofed and sealed. The last thing to be sealed on was the hatch where the driver got in. One man to the tank. And we had to back them onto the ship. And when we got over to Normandy, I always thought they stopped about a mile from the beach. It was, we drove those off the back end. We went underwater. The smokestack was built up about 10 or 12 feet higher than the tank. They told us to put it in second gear and about 2/3 throttle, and luck to you, there's maybe mines out there. And don't turn. So we took off, and that's, all 21 of us were fortunate enough we got to the...
You drove them underwater?
Oh yes, they went underwater.
How'd the engines run underwater?
They were sealed with the air tubes and everything sticking up so they'd suck in air from above, and the exhaust fumes would go out.
Did you drive one of them?
I drove one out. That was the longest trip I ever made in a tank, I think.
How long did it take you?
Oh, probably didn't take more than maybe 3 or 4 minutes, but it seemed like a week, you know.
Oh, yeah.
When all you could see of that turn was water. Then you get to thinking, well, to have I turned, am I going straight? You know, a million things goes through your mind. Nobody there to talk to you. You're on your own.
Well, how did you know where you were going to come out at?
You're supposed to come out up on the beach. That was where we were.
Where? At what
At
location?
Normandy.
On Normandy?
Yeah.
Now, was this beach secured at that time?
Oh, yes. Yes, this was 11 days after D-Day.
11 days
Yeah.
after D-Day. Now, did you stay there?
No. We took the tanks back about a mile from the beach, and then we went back to the beach and got on a little boat that took us back out to the LTC, and then we went back to England.
You turned these tanks over to some crews that were over there then?
Right.
Then you went back then to Liverpool?
Went back to Southampton.
Southampton.
Southampton's where we.
Then what'd you do, Paul?
Well, we got on a army truck and went from there back up to War Minister, back where we had been, back to the company.
I see.
We were replacements. It was a replacement company that they put all those guys in.
Mm-hmm. Then what'd you do?
Well, it wasn't long after that until we were called out again and loaded up and went back to Liverpool and back across the channel. And then we were in a replacement company in Normandy for a while, and I was assigned to the 3rd Armored Division just the day that St. Lo fell.
I see. When you went back over the second time, did you take a tank again?
No.
The way you did?
No.
You just went over.
We went over as a replacement company. That's what, yeah.
I see. And you landed, and then by foot you walked to someplace? Or?
Yeah, we walked back on the beach probably a mile, and then they loaded us up in the truck. Took us 3 or 4 miles or so back to an area that had ready for troops to stay there. They moved us around every once in a while.
At what point was the first place that you saw actually a combat?
In St. Lo.
There was fighting going on there?
No, St. Lo had just fell, and I was assigned to the 3rd Armored Division the day that St. Lo fell. So we took off from St. Lo, and from there on, we were the spearhead for the 1st Army.
Yeah. Did you have a tank assigned to you yet?
Yes,
then?
yes, I did at St. Lo when
At St. Lo.
when I went into the 3rd Armored Division, right.
What job did you get in your tank there then, Paul?
The first tank they put me in, I was they need an assistant gunner and radio man, so that was my job. And I did that until that tank was knocked out, and the gunner got hurt, and
Yeah.
so
Well,
the next one I got into, I was with
let's get this first one. Paul, what happened in that first tank? What that you lost it?
Well, we got hit down in the lower part of it, the side, down the bogey wheels, and when they get hit, it's you get out of there in a hurry, because the next one's gonna, if that one doesn't set it on fire, the next one will. And on that one, we were coming out of the tank as fast as possible, and the gunner got out. He was going down over the side of the tank as I was coming out the top, and another one hit it in the side right under me, and he got splattered up pretty good with some shrapnel from that.
Did you lose any of your crew?
We just lost him as a casualty. He went back to the hospital, and he came back later on after I was hurt.
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell you about that one later.
Yeah, I'll come to that later.
But, it was I think he was the only one that we lost in that one.
I see. Okay. Now, in what area would this be a place you could show us where this took place?
Well, as best I remember,
You got your pointer there. Maybe you can point out some of these things to us, Paul.
we lost this first tank somewhere right along in here, in this area, in Normandy.
Mm-hmm.
And it was You know, you sort of lose track of days and everything else when you're up there.
Yeah, I know. One day they run together.
You don't take a bath, you don't shave.
You know,
It was we had pretty much combat all the way through here, and when we got over to this area, this is where I lost that first tank.
yeah. Now, when you say combat, now, was that tank fighting?
Yes, it was.
Among German tanks?
Yes, but those fights only lasted, you hardly ever had one last over 3 or 4 minutes at the longest. Usually it was only a couple of minutes.
Was there anyone on the ground outside of these, infantry or following you like you see in a movie,
Oh,
for
yeah,
example?
yeah, sometimes we had infantry that rode on our tank with us. They'd get on the back end and ride with us.
I see.
And but when the shells started flying, they were mighty glad to get away from that tank. They thought that tank was drawing fire, you know, and it would. But
Or, when you crawl out of that tank there, weren't you kind of a sitting duck for the enemy then?
well, when you're on foot, you go. That's
Where did you go?
I went back, and that time I went to another tank, and we jumped in and rode with them until we got back where they got the battle over with. That one. And,
There was room in the tank for you.
yeah, we made room.
I can imagine. Yes.
And it wasn't. I think it was probably. It seemed to me like it was the same day I was in another tank. We had another replacement tank up there for us.
Now, can you point to us now where this was that you got knocked out of your first tank?
It was right along in this area through here.
Is that in Belgium?
Yes. No, this is not in Belgium.
France?
This is in Normandy.
That's in Normandy.
Yeah, this is still in Normandy. Well, it's in France, yes. Normandy is this part of it over here. Yeah.
What? Okay, then tell us. After you got your second tank, then what did you do?
Well, we headed on up here and went up to into Belgium. We hit Mons, Belgium on the 2nd of September, 1944. And we were quite happy when we got there. There was a big bridge that had been blown up, and we thought, oh boy, we're going to get a rest now. It didn't work that way. The crazy engineers put us up a bridge, and we were moving on. I mean, they put it up and nothing flat. A big wooden bridge. I never seen one go up so fast in my life. It was overnight, and they had us. We had quite a battle in this town.
Tell us about it, Paul.
The Germans was coming down from up north, trying to get back heading back for Germany. And there were, I mean, thousands of them. And we sat there one day on a Sunday, and our company, and our division, with the help of the infantry around there, took over 35,000 prisoners. I never seen so many prisoners in my life. It was there was very few incidents that happened that was where it was dangerous. We had one load of them that came in, and I was trying to help search them. And there was a German SS trooper in the bunch, and he didn't want me to search it. He kept stepping backwards. He finally got back to where he was getting in line with our lieutenant, and he dropped his hand in front of his shirt, and we found out that he had 2 Belgian 25 caliber pistols in there. And he also had a dagger that I had on display at the jailhouse with a German swastika on it. I don't know whether you
No, I haven't
got
seen
to
that.
see that. But he had that in his boot. And what he was trying to do was get our lieutenant. That was his intent. But we kind of changed his plans a little on that deal.
That's good.
So, outside of that, it was we had more prisoners than we knew what to do with. It was the infantry was kind of circling up in fields and trying to take those prisoners in there. It was a mess there. But those were the ones that were trying to get back into Germany that would have, later on, would have really given us a hard time if they'd have got to those pillboxes and got those guns manned in the Siegfried line.
Yes, I see. What happened then, Paul?
Well, after we got this part of it wiped out, we started on head into Belgium, or through Belgium. We went. It was rather quiet coming through Belgium until we got around Liege, I guess is the way they pronounce it, and lost a tank there too.
Tell us about it.
Well, it got hit. It was hit down the lower side too, more to the front, and they got the assistant driver in that one. He was killed. We got out of that tank without any. It was far flying out of it, but I managed to get out without. I escaped that without any problems.
What did you? There again, did you just get out and get into another tank?
I went back to company headquarters. I wasn't there very long until they said, we got another tank coming in here. Put you guys back together again. And I was a lieutenant all the way from Normandy. He was a tank commander. And so we stayed together until just a day or two after that. We were getting down in here close to Germany, right close to the Siegfried line. And we came to a crossroads that had been, evidently it looked like it was pretty good, but there was a big castle sitting there, and quite a lot of excitement there. We had a lot of infantry guys around there, and had a sniper up in this building, and every time anyone wanted to stick their head out, well, he'd shoot at them. And so the lieutenant said, turn that 75 around towards that window, and the next time he gets up there, see if we can push that sniper up. Well, we did, and that was the end of the sniper, but that building was full of, I don't know why there were so many around there, unless it was because it was full of booze. They had more German whiskey in there than I think I ever seen in my life. Of course, we weren't allowed to have that in the tanks. But that was quite a battle at that time, and that evening we got out of the tank. That's the only time I ever remember us leaving a tank in the night. We left the infantry around it, and we went back to a pillbox and stayed. And the next morning our lieutenant was hit. I was shaving, an artillery shell came in, and he was back behind the tank, and I went under the tank, helmet and everything, and kind of got a lot of gravel stuff thrown at me, but he got splattered up pretty good.
Did you lose him?
Sent him back. He was putting up quite a fight. He didn't want me to call the medics, and I said, no, you're going back. He was bleeding pretty good. So I called the medics for him on the radio, and they came and got him, and he told me that was an order not to call him, but I said, well, you can forget the orders this time. You're going back. You need to rest anyway. And I never heard anything more from him. I hate to get ahead of this, but until last summer, an old buddy of mine told me that he did make it back. He was promoted from second lieutenant to captain before it was over with, but when he got back to the company, they made him company commander. I never saw him again.
Oh, that's interesting.
There was a lot of strange little things that happened during the trip through there. You know, it was, I can remember some of it seemed like that every German that they had that could carry a gun or a bazooka or something was down there where we went. And I remember one German that had a bazooka that evidently he was aiming at getting ready to hit our tank, and a tanker behind us swung a 75 around and cut him in two in the middle with an armor-piercing shell. And that was one of the most horrible sights I think
I can imagine.
ever seen. It was when you see the top part of a man floundering around with both arms and everything else is gone.
Yeah.
It's a horrible sight.
Yes, it is.
It is.
It's part of the horror of war.
Even though he was an enemy, it's still a horrible sight.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm sure he didn't last long. He couldn't have.
No, he would have left it in. But now you got into a different tank after you got out of the second one. Then what happened?
Okay, we went through the Siegfried line. We hit a place in the Siegfried line farmer had taken out one of these dragon teeth so he could get his farm equipment through. And we were fortunate enough to find that spot, and so we went through there. And there wasn't any mines there because the farmers were using that road too. And that was the way of our company. We were the first company to get into Germany, and that was on the 12th day of September. It was about 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
That'd be 44.
That was in 1944. And we rolled into Germany, and I knew that was going to be my last day on earth because we went down a long hill down into Germany, and there was a big steep cliff on the left-hand side, and there was a big drop-off on the other side. And down at the bottom, this road went about 3/4 of a mile, and there was a turn. And I said, boys, there's going to be a 88 down there just as sure as you're born, and the whole company comes roaring down this hill. Thank goodness they hadn't got one down there. I think it would have picked us off like a fish in a bucket. But we got into a little town there and we captured some Germans. One of them was an officer, and our company commander questioned him, and he said, no, there's nobody around here, everything's real quiet, so the Germans have never got it armed yet, you know. And we had 34 tanks in that task force, and in just a few minutes all heck broke loose, and we ended up with 4 tanks left in just a matter of a few minutes. We were almost wiped out, but not quite.
Were you one of the 4 that was left?
No, I was one of the 4 that was left at that time, yeah. And the next day we went into Stolberg, and they'd sent us up some more. They brought us in some more tanks. Another task force had pulled in there with us. And the next day was when I got hurt. The tank I was in quit running that day, and we had shot at everything that we could shoot at without moving anymore. And artillery shells was dropping in pretty close, and so we got out of it and run. And I was almost captured. There was I got into a little old house, and there's a nice, quiet little looking town. I thought it was just a small town, but this was right in the edge of Stolberg, which Stolberg is a big town, big city. And I went into this little house, and there was a fellow came in. He said there's an infantryman laying out there by the door that's got his leg off, needs some help. And said he says I can't do anything for him. And I said, well, I'll go see what I can do. And I went out, and I wasn't a medic, but I went out, and he had his foot off down by his ankle, and he was bleeding pretty profusely. And I put a tourniquet on his leg and started doctoring him up and bandaging him up, and he was hollering at him. He wanted water. He was just, I don't know what the matter with him. He was dry, I guess. And I give him everything but his sulfur pills. I went out to a tank in the street, and it had been knocked out. It had a can of water sitting hanging on the back of it. I got that can down off of there, and was pouring water in his canteen, filling it up for him. I'm going to give him his pills. And while I was doing that, an artillery shell landed behind me and put me in the middle of the street or up against the house. That's when that was my last of the combat. That was, from then on, it was.
Did that knock you out?
I don't think so. I landed against the house, and if it did, I never knew whether it was knocked out or not. I mean, you know, I don't remember. I couldn't remember that I was knocked out. I may have been out for a few minutes and then come to. You know, it's like when you faint. But
now, where was this that you were hit now? That you're telling us about?
This was at Stolberg, Germany.
Stolberg, Germany.
Yeah, right there.
Okay. Well, what's the first thing you remember then, Paul?
Well, I got up and got down in the basement of this house, and there was an old bed sheet down there that I had used to help bandage this guy, this infantryman up. So I tore up some more of it. Used it. I was hitting the elbow, and this hand, this arm, and I had a piece of shrapnel on my right hip. And I think what scared me the most was when I pulled my pants down to work on my hip. I was bleeding over here on the front of my side here, and come to find out that's where it hit the ground when I got blood over there, just a bruise more than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
But I bandaged myself up as best I could, and seen I was going to have to get out of there, and I looked out the back of the house and I could see German infantry guys coming. So I headed out the front door and run down along the hedgerow, and I got run back to a pillbox where they set up as command headquarters. I went in there and they got a stretcher for me to lay down on, and that was on the 18th of September, and I never had my feet on the floor or on the ground after that until the last of November.
They take you to a field hospital?
I went from tent hospital to just jumping from tent to tent, it seemed like. The first night they operated on me and they took some of the shrapnel out and set my arm that was broke, and they put my hand in a splint. The bones, all the bones in my hands here was broke, splintered. And fingers, they had them out on the board with pins through them, the rubber bands to pull them back. It was a long ordeal.
No, it sounds like it. If you hadn't have, and I'll say how you did it, if you hadn't run, you'd been captured.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, it is a kind of a strange thing. When you're hurt like that, at least in my case, I didn't hurt at that time. I felt no pain. I knew I was banged up, but really I didn't feel any pain. I don't know whether it's because that shrapnel's so hot when it hits you that it kind of stops the pain or what, but the pain doesn't come till later.
How far did you run to a pillbox?
It was probably at least 2 blocks.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Well, you just did that
Well, they speeded me up.
adrenaline, you know.
They speeded me up a little because there was some machine gun farther out that was cutting some leaves off of some bushes alongside of the sidewalk where I was running.
Had you been a track star at New Ross?
No, but that will make one out of you.
I would think so. I would think so. Yes. Oh, that's terrible. Then from then on, tell us what happened.
Well, I was in from hospital to hospital till they got me up in Paris. I was in a big general hospital in Paris, and they did a little more work on me there. And I guess one of the most interesting things that happened in Paris in the hospital there was they gave me some sleeping pills one time, and then the nurse came right back in and said, Fred Astaire is in here. He wants, would you like to see him? And I said, sure. I said, I want to see him dance. I was about half out of it. But he came into the room and he slapped his feet around a little.
Did he?
Yeah, he did. And then went on out.
Yeah. That's great. You remember things like that, you know.
After I was in Paris in the hospital there for a few weeks, they took us then, and I was put on an airplane and flew to England. And when I got over there, they sent me down to Cardiff, Wales. There was a big general hospital there, and I was there up until long in February or January, last of January, I guess. And then they decided to send me home.
You mentioned, Paul, that from the time how many were in your unit and how many were left? We were talking about that before we started the interview. Can you go over those figures?
Yeah, there were 110 in a full tank company. And the morning that I got hurt, the company commander came back to the tank I was at, and he said, pulled me out, and he said, this was about 8 o'clock in the morning. He said at noon, we need second lieutenants. And he said, you'll be taken behind the lines to be commissioned as a second lieutenant. And come back as a tank commander. And that was the last I heard of that, because about 10 o'clock that morning I got hit, and that was, never heard any more about that. But I think in the long run I was real fortunate that I got hurt when I did. I was telling you about earlier about this gunner that got hit in the first tank. He was a little Puerto Rican. His name was Octaviano Carrion. I could never forget that name. And he only weighed about 110, 15 pounds. And when he got hit, I drug him out of the tank and carried him over went to an old farmhouse. And there was a coal chute outside the house, or down in the basement. And I backed down that basement coal chute, or dragging him in there. And we got down in the basement, and there was a pile of coal down there. It looked like hammerheads. Round coal is pressed dust, I think. And we went tumbling down over that and got down on the floor. And I was trying to fix him up and heard a commotion back behind us, and looked around, and there was 2 German infantry guys standing there with their rifles and bayonets. We had them sitting beside them, and they stand there and said, "Comrade, comrade." And, so we sent them on out to let the infantry have them.
Oh my goodness.
But later on, I have a book that tells all about what happened to the 3rd Armored Division from St. Lo all the way to the end of the war. And later on in this book, it tells about Octaviano Carrion. He was patched up and went back to the company. And he had rode still another tank to its doom back in the Battle of the Bulge. And there was a lot of snow on the ground, and it must have been about like it is here now, the way it sounded. And he was, he and his company, or he and the guys from his tank, they seen they were in German territory and they were going to be captured if they weren't careful, so they laid down in the snow and played dead. And it tells about it in there that the German infantry guys that came up to them and kicked them in the side, and they took it without flinching, you know, and they reached out and they got this Octaviano Carrion by the hair and picked him up, threw him back in the snow and said kaput, and left him. Well, after they left, they said they laid in the snow for about 3 hours until it was getting dark enough that they could slip out of there, and they went down through a ravine, got down to a river, and said there was about a ½ inch of ice on that river. They couldn't walk on it, but they had to wade across that river and break the ice, and said every time they'd break a little of that ice, that the Germans would start shooting again. And so I figured that I was real fortunate that I got hurt like I did, instead of going ahead and being with them guys, because if there was ever anyone that went through total hell, they surely did. I can't think of anything that would have been any worse than being kicked around like that and have to play dead, you know.
What did you say, there were 4 left out of the group?
There were 3 of us when the time I got hurt. There were just 3 of us there. Some of the guys got hurt and went back later. See, they patched them up and they come back later on. But, we had a lot of replacements altogether. The 3rd Armored Division lost better than 3,000, over 3,000 people killed. We were the spearhead for the 1st Army.
Very interesting, Paul.
One of the things that I would like to impress on everybody, the 3rd Armored Division was the spearhead division for the 1st Army. General Patton was in charge of the 3rd Army, and everybody got the 3rd Armored Division connected to the General Patton, but it wasn't that way. The 3rd Armored was with the 1st Army. That was Hodges. General Hodges was in charge of that. And our task force was Lovelady, Colonel Lovelady, who just passed away not too long ago.
Well, anything else, Paul, about your experiences before or shortly after you were wounded?
After I was wounded, and while I was still in the hospital in Wales, I was bedfast until the latter part of November. And after I was able to get out of bed, they took 30 of us guys that had been in combat, that had a lot of combat. they thought. And they put us in a company and they used us, or in a barracks, and they used us as guinea pigs. They put us on narco-insulin. I don't know whether you ever heard tell of narco-insulin or not. That was an insulin that was laced with narcotics. And they thought it would settle everybody's nerves, and it was an experiment to try that out. Well, I didn't think too much about it, but when they got through with this treatment, my left foot was numb. And they said, oh, just temporary. Well, it was temporary along about 1986, and then started going up my leg. And then a short time, the other foot started in, and now both legs are numb up above my knees. And they've come to the conclusion that the narco-insulin was what started all this. It starts nerve deterioration.
I see.
And that is nerve deterioration. And it's they didn't recognize that. They said it wasn't in my hospital record, but we finally found it. It took us 50 years to finally dig it out, but we did find it. And that's how I knew that it was narco-insulin. And I found out too that narco-insulin was outlawed real fast after that because they seemed to have too many bad side effects. So I've often wondered whether through the years which has done me the most harm. I had excellent treatment in the Army, in the hospital, but the results of being used as a guinea pig has it's caused me more and more trouble now. In fact, I'll tell you later. It's I think that's about all I have to say about it.
Okay. If we could at this time, let's pause for a few moments. We're back with Paul Dickson now, talking about his experiences in the battlefields in Belgium and France and a little ways into Germany. Paul, would you point out there where all of this took place in relationship to what we hear a lot about in history, the Battle of the Bulge? Where did that take place?
Well, this map shows the Battle of the Bulge over here. During that time, I was in the hospital in Wales during Christmas of '44. But there was a lot of this other territory here that was also encircled by Germans. Whether this might have been the worst battle of it, but this part over in here around Rutgen and Stolberg, and up in here where they call the Rose Pocket, that was there was fierce fighting there, and according to the history of the 3rd Armored Division, the Battle of the Bulge was also over in this part also.
I see. Now, where's the Siegfried Line?
The Siegfried Line is right, let's see if it shows it on here. Stolberg here was 18 miles inside the Siegfried Line. And the Siegfried Line came back over here, Rutgen. That was the first town that we hit when we come through the Siegfried Line, or come into the Siegfried Line, into Germany.
Yeah, how far did you get into Germany?
I got in 18 miles inside of Germany.
How did you find the enemy there? Were there enemy around in all of the pillboxes and everything?
The pillboxes, there were quite a few pillboxes there, and they were, all that we seen, we went through, were empty at the time. Thank goodness they never had time to get them manned. But those pillboxes were, it would have taken there's no way you could blow them out with a tank. And usually it would take almost a truckload of TNT to blow one of them.
I see. Now the enemy, we've talked about our tanks. Tell us, Paul, a little bit about the German tanks.
Well, I think the German tank was probably one of the best armored tanks that there were. At least they had the best gun. The front end of a German Mark VI Tiger tank, it was almost impossible for us to penetrate that with a 75mm shell. We could hit it in the tracks or hit it in the side. If we could ever get around so we could shoot them in the side, they were ours. But there was one time we went into a little area, it was like an orchard, and they started, all of a sudden, all the heck broke loose. There was a Mark 6 Tiger tank in there, and they were shooting at us, and we were within 150 yards of it, or 200. And they kept shooting and missing, and I bounced 7 armor-piercing shells off the front of it. And then we threw a smoke shell out to, we got the heck out of there and got around to the side where we could hit it, and when we finally got it, it was full of kids. There was a bunch of kids. I don't think the oldest one in there was over 12 years old.
Were they manning?
They were in that tank, and if they'd known how to use that gun, I wouldn't be sitting here today talking. But that was one of the things that we ran into. It's a horrible thing when you, of course, when you get down to it, if the war was in this country, every man, woman, and child would do everything they could to defend this country.
Yes. And
that's exactly what they were trying to do, even though they were kids. They got in that tank, and they were an American tank there. They were going to see if they could hit it. But thank goodness they didn't know how to use it. They knew how to shoot, but they didn't know how to aim, I guess. But this is something that I hope that the American people in the future will remember. With all these foreign countries, let's don't never have a war on this continent. This is it's bad to send boys away from home to fight, but it's better to fight on their soil than it is ours.
Right.
When you go into a country and you see nothing left, it looks like one rock sitting on top of another, someone had kicked it off. And that's about the way we left France and Belgium and through there. When if there was fighting to be done, the territory was tore up. That's all there was to it. It's just like St. Lo. They bombed St. Lo for days. There was one day they sent 3,500 bombers over there. And it was a city built in rock. But when they got through with it, there wasn't much left.
Did you see much of citizens, of just regular, like Frenchmen and Belgian people? Were they around much, or did they just get out of the way?
Well, when the fighting was on, you'd wonder where on earth everybody was. And when it was over, all of a sudden they were all there. I've seen times when we couldn't hardly get out in the streets with the tanks because there'd be so many people out there greeting us. And they'd be out there wanting to throw you up bottles of wine and flowers and something to eat and everything. I mean, they'd give you the shirt off their back nearly because they were so happy to be liberated from the Americans.
That's right.
And I don't think you could ever find an American that had been over there that hasn't handed out his cigarettes, his candy bars, and everything.
Chewing gum.
Yeah, chewing gum and everything to those people, those kids especially.
Yeah.
They were most grateful. It was and then sometimes we would run across some of the women that had been, I guess, had been fraternizing the German soldiers. And the French and Belgians, they'd bring them out and shave their head and right out in public. And I've seen them with blood running down over their face where they cut a swastika on their forehead and was going to leave a scar for the rest of their life. They marked them up good.
Yes, sure did. Well, Paul, you're in Wales and in the hospital. Then take us from there back to the United States.
Okay, it was real interesting when we left Wales and were taken to a ship at Liverpool. They had a lot of the Air Force boys that were coming home on rotation plan, and they took us hospital patients, and we were assigned to cabins, mind you, a cabin on a nice big ship. And we were fortunate, the cabin I was in, we had the USO troop right next door. And the Air Force boys served their meals to us in courses. They shined their shoes, they made up our beds. It was really a luxury trip coming home from overseas. And the USO troops, they were there to entertain us all the time. I brought back some souvenirs from some of the movie stars that are has-beens now, years of the past.
Like who? Can you remember?
Well, one was Irene Manning. I have a German note that she signed for me. I had that on display. I think it was over at the library. And oh, I can't remember all the names of them now, but there were quite a few of the people that had entertained the troops, and it was really an enjoyable trip. Well, we got back to New York, and I was taken to Hallam General Hospital. I was there for about a week, and then they put us on a hospital ship, and we went up the northern route through Canada, going back to come back down through Detroit and then down to Battle Creek, Michigan. And I was at Percy Jones General Hospital. I got in there, oh, I think it was about the 19th of February. I arrived at Percy Jones, and I told the doctor that was put in charge of me that I just got back to the States and I hadn't had a furlough, and I'd kind of like to, or wonder if I couldn't get a 30-day leave. And he said, well, yeah, I think we can arrange that. Said, there's not much we can do for you in 30 days anyhow. You're convalescing. So I went home and got married. My wife and I, we'd went together since we were back, like I think I was 16 years old when I started going with her.
Yeah. What was your wife's name?
Edith Swank. And so we've been married, it'll be 51 years the first day of March. It's coming March. 1996. We celebrated our 50th anniversary last year.
Did you take her back to Percy Jones Hospital?
Yeah, I did. Took her back up there, and I was fortunate to get her an apartment right across the street from the hospital. It wasn't really an apartment, it was a sleeping room. It was hard to get anything, any place to stay. And if I remember right, it was something like $8 a week maybe at that time. But I had to be in the hospital back up there. I had to be there from 8 o'clock in the morning until 5 o'clock in the evening. So she would always come in and visit with me in the afternoon. And that brings up another interesting bit. I was in Percy Jones there from February to June, and they had high school courses that was available to servicemen. So I finished my high school while I was there, and got that out of the way. And the only thing that I could have gotten my diploma if I went back to Battle Creek for the graduation. But I was sent out to, well, I was discharged, and I came home, and so I never went back to get it. I didn't figure it was going to be worth that much to me.
Did you, you came back then to Crawfordsville, Montgomery County?
Yes.
You and your new wife?
Yeah, we bought a farm, and when I got back, and we still live there, the same place. We were away from it for 16 years, but we kept the farm all that time. I've enjoyed everything that I've done in this life, I guess. It's if I had it all to do over again, I don't know of anything I would change, because what I did at the time I thought was right, and that's the way I do it again. I think.
Do you have any children?
We have 4 daughters.
What are their names?
The oldest one is Linda. She lives here in Crawfordsville, and the next one is Karen, lives at Plymouth, Indiana, and Janet lives up in Tippecanoe County, and Donna, their youngest daughter, lives in Valparaiso.
I see. You have any grandchildren?
We have 7 grandchildren, 5 granddaughters, and 2 grandsons.
That's great. That's great. What, you farmed then, did you have any other occupation besides farming?
I didn't farm too much. The first few years, well, it's kind of a silly story maybe to some people, but when I got out of the service, my hands, both of them were about like this. And in fact, at Percy Jones, they wanted to amputate these 2 fingers. They didn't think they would ever work right. And so I came home and I bought that little farm and I bought some milk cows. And I sat there and milked. And I kept on until my fingers came out of it. And I always said that those old cows are what does.
Yeah, well, that's very...
You got to pull a living out somehow. You know?
Yeah, that's right.
But boy, I'll tell you, I've milked a lot of times when I would love to get them cows away. It hurts so bad, but it worked out.
Yeah. What else have you done?
Well, I went into the plumbing and heating business shortly after I was out of the service, and I was in that for several years, and then I discovered I had gravel on the farm, and so we opened up a gravel pit, and one thing led to another, and directly it was a lot of heavy equipment and drag lines, and Lake Holiday came along, and I had the contract for 18-mile roads at Lake Holiday. And then I was about 32 or 3 years old and had a light heart attack, and decided that the gravel business or the furnace business or none of that was going to be very good for the girls to get into, so I switched over and went into real estate. I got my real estate broker's license, and so I finished up as in the real estate as a realtor, and I got into the mortgage business later on to help complement the real estate. And ended up here now in Bruin, I guess, in politics.
I wondered how long before you were going to mention the politics. What is your political position now?
I'm a county commissioner. I'm president of the Board of Commissioners this year.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Paul, it's been I really enjoyed visiting with you about your experiences. You've been through an awful lot, and we sure appreciate you taking the time to come out and give us this interview and tell us about your experiences. And on behalf of the people of Montgomery County and really the people of America, I want to thank you for what you did.
Thank you.
Thank you.